Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something that I will never forget. It gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a terraced house, it's 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks and so on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area, with several of those terraced houses spread across to my neighborhood. So seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I live maybe 10 meters away from school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone for around an hour before she got home. This one day that I got home from school, I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double-check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9. Being alone was a little scary, even though it was in the middle of the day and only for an hour. I then would rush to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was located 1 floor above the patio, with a view to the road that I told you about before. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked and I thought, did she finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. There's a guy standing on my patio, a tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring woman or something. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stopped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this. Eventually snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He kept on eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in bed under my sheets, shivering with fear, as I hear these creepy, high-pitched noises from the guy eating cigarette stumps from the ashtray on my patio. I kind of blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy saying stuff like, "What are you doing? Get over here, or we'll come down and arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sounds were more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, 1 man and a woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me and out of my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I'd ever heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, screaming still. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually he made it. After a while, he had managed to wake up the female officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else, because he just looked at me and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." And I started to cry. By this time, neighbors started to arrive wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and they eventually left. Before they left, they promised to come back and talk to us about what had happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged people live, located around 5 kilometers from where I live. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, had died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom at my house. He missed the routines and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago because he was extremely strong. From what I heard, he had extreme tensions in the body because of the autism, making his muscles grow stronger and stronger throughout the years. This was the reason he had reacted the way he did when the police came this day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again, and he promised that it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back, until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out and I had bought the house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there looking at me. I look at him and I give him a nod. And then I hear the high-pitched noises. Holy crap, it's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched noises made me realize. My heart started racing and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to get out again. Because I kept my cool a bit longer than when I was 9, I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think that he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. He didn't. He smiled and he looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside and his face lit up with pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. It almost made me tear up. All of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. But I realized that I had to call the facility to let them know, and the caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, and we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day that he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say that it's the highlight of his week, and it makes my heart warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet. Guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. But now my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons. My friend Tom. It was an early summer morning and the sun was up, but few people were out. In fact, these streets were practically dead that morning. My mom decided to take my sister, only 1 year old at the time, seated in a stroller, and I, to throw away some garbage at the garbage station. I might add that the garbage station is kind of secluded from nearby houses, bordering one of those deep, dark forests of eastern Sweden. Since I was only 4 when this happened, the memories from the incident had faded a lot. However, my mom remembers all of it. She says that upon entering the station, she immediately got an eerie feeling of being watched. I remember that feeling too. I felt creeped out, even though I didn't know why I was scared. I guess I could sense my mom's fear. Walking along that secluded garbage station, my mom suddenly stopped and told me this. Hold onto the stroller as hard as you can and don't let go. no matter what. That's my most vivid memory I have of this, and I don't think I'll ever forget those words. I'll at least never forget how they made me feel. It was as if my blood had turned to ice. I just froze. My mom sounded stern, but even a toddler can sense when someone's scared out of their mind. My mom was definitely afraid of something. The rest is just a blur. I don't remember much, apart from the aforementioned, so I'll let the rest of the story be told from the perspective of my mother. This is the recollection of her experience, recalled to the best of my abilities, but in my own words. Not far from where we were standing, a truck was parked with a man seated in the front. Nothing unusual. A lot of truck drivers stopped to rest by the side of the road. But this man was staring, and he wouldn't stop staring. He stared right at me, examining my body with the determined gaze of a predator. Gluing the three of us in his sight, he truly seemed pleased by the fear he had instilled on our faces. And his eyes, they were something else, almost as if they didn't belong to a human, but rather to a predator on the savannah. I felt like prey, stuck in the claws of a lion, and I couldn't move. And that's when he smiled at me. I remember that dead smile, those cold, calculating eyes, and the way that he licked his lips, almost as if to say, I could kill you all if I wanted to. I believed this was the point in time, into this strange encounter, when my mom told me to hold on to the stroller, to hold on tightly and not let go. My mom is a small woman, 160 centimeters, weighing only about 48 kilograms, and she could easily have been overpowered by the overweight man in the truck. My mom later admitted she was afraid he would jump out of the truck and knock her out, possibly assaulting her, or even taking me and my younger sister. We bolted out of there. We didn't throw away much garbage that morning. We just turned around and walked home as quickly as my mom could do with a stroller and a 4-year-old toddler at her side. We never talked about what happened that day, up until very recently. The incident has always lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, as that weird thing that happened when I was a kid. And every time I walk past that garbage station, I get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. As previously mentioned, this happened around 2006. Fast forward to 2008. The face of a 10-year-old little girl called Engla was printed across the front page of every newspaper in sight. She had been kidnapped and murdered, and the perpetrator was an overweight truck driver named Anders Öcklund, now known as one of Sweden's most infamous killers. Anders Öcklund was charged with the murder of Engla, alongside the murder of a woman named Pernilla. And he's also suspected of abducting another little girl who's still currently missing, making him more than one thing. And my mom says that when she saw Öcklund's picture in the paper, when she saw those cold, familiar eyes, she knew that he was the creepy man from the garbage station that early morning all those years ago. Thinking how my mom or my sister or me, or all of us, could have been his victims, that sends chills up my spine. Anders, even though you're behind bars, let's never meet again. It was New Year's Eve, my birthday, and myself and 2 of my friends were out in the front of my house listening to music on my iPod. We were about 12 at the time and there was no one else around. It was probably 10 or 10:30 at night and we were waiting for the illegal fireworks to light up down the street. It happened every year at this time. It probably sounds a little weird. 12-year-old kids by themselves at 10:30 p.m. listening to Katy Perry in the middle of the street. But it wasn't too unusual. See, my neighborhood is very close and we all know all of our neighbors really well. So our parents who were in the house and ourselves weren't at all concerned. We were listening to Hot and Cold by Katy Perry, Yes, it was that time of the decade, and we were jamming along to it when we began to hear a whistle. Now, first off, it sounded like it was part of the song, so initially everyone ignored it. But that was until it started to distort and go out of rhythm to the music playing. It didn't seem to be in tune with the song, and it was eerily out of pitch. I don't know why, maybe to hear it better, but my friend decided to pause the music. Maybe it was just in the song, or maybe the phone was glitching. As soon as the music stopped, the whistling continued, pitchy and slow. We were all a little bit spooked and it was dark outside, other than the few streetlights on the road. We couldn't really see much or make out much of the darkness other than the strange whistling. We were able to pinpoint the direction it was coming from soon enough. We turned towards it and froze. About 10 meters from where we stood, just on the edge of the street lamp's light, was a man. He looked quite disheveled, most likely homeless, and he was just standing there, looking at us, whistling that godforsaken, pitchy whistle. We were all frozen for a while, as I guess we were caught off guard, until my fight or flight kicked in. I yelled at my friends to get inside and they began to scream and run up the driveway. I pushed and shoved them forward, terrified because I don't know whether they could hear what I was hearing. But the whistling had finally stopped. But something else was drowning out the silence. Heavy-setted footsteps. He was chasing after us. I screamed bloody murder at them, opening the front door and shoving them inside, not caring if I hurt them. I turned and slammed the deadbolt just as he had reached the screen door. I watched as his figure came into view. He was dirty, wearing soiled long-sleeve clothing, had an unkempt beard and wore a torn beanie. As I closed the door, he stopped just ahead of the screen, looked me dead in the eye, and murmured something that still makes my skin crawl. Damn it. One of my friends consoled the other, who was now in tears, as I watched him through the peephole. He lingered for a second more and then disappeared into the blackness. I remember my friends grabbing me, asking if I was okay, and then pointing down to my hands. I was shaking like a leaf. We never told our parents. That was over 10 years ago, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies to think what would have happened if we hadn't noticed the out-of-place whistling. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just the three of us at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left led down that hallway to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I'd been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try and scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it. But she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food that we had. This really caught me by surprise because in all the years that I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by accident. Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom. She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. A tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man that they were looking for in the area. It turns out that he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home.